The air on the Vikalar starship was cold and smelled of metal and something else, something like old leather. Jin stood quietly next to her friend Min. They were the first humans to step onto a Vikalar ship. It was a big moment, but Jin did not feel excited. She felt very, very small. The Vikalar were a tall people. Their skin was covered in hard, dark scales that shone under the ship's blue lights. Their hands had 3 thick fingers and a sharp thumb. They were born to be warriors. Everyone knew that. Their guide was a Vikalar named Kale. He was even bigger than the others. When he spoke, his voice was a deep rumble that Jin felt in her bones. "This is the main passage to the command deck," Kyle said, his tone formal. He did not look at them as he walked. He seemed to be talking to the air. "It is the heart of the Oath of Conquest. From here we have brought order to 3 star systems." "It is very impressive," Min said, her voice a little too bright. She was the engineer and was always more friendly than Jin. Jin was the cultural expert. Her job was to watch and to listen, not to talk. Kale made a sound, a low grunt. It was hard to tell if it was a sound of thanks or not. He finally looked down at them. His eyes were a solid pale yellow with no pupil. "Your species is soft. You have no natural armor. Your bones are fragile. It is a wonder you have left your world." Jin kept her face calm. She had heard things like this before. "We find other ways to be strong," she said, her voice quiet but clear. Kale's mouth twisted. It might have been a smile. It was hard to tell with all the teeth. "Strength is in the claw and the blade. It is simple. It is true. Come. I will show you true strength." He turned and led them away from the main passage. The doors that opened for him were huge and thick. They entered a room that was different from the rest of the ship. The lights here were warmer. The gray metal walls were covered with hooks and stands. On every hook and stand there was a blade. This was Kale's personal room. His collection. "This?" Kyle said, and for the first time his voice lost its formal tone. It became almost gentle. It was the voice of a man showing his greatest treasures. "This is the soul of the Vikalar." The room was full of sharp metal. Long blades, short blades, curved blades, straight blades. They all gleamed under the soft light. They were spotless. You could tell they were loved. Jin looked around. Her eyes moved from one blade to the next. She did not see weapons of war. She saw something else. Something very familiar. A strange feeling started to grow in her chest. It was a mix of surprise and confusion. But she said nothing. Kale walked to one wall. He carefully lifted a long, thin blade from its stand. It was narrow and came to a very sharp point. The handle was wrapped in dark, rough material. "This," he said, holding it with great respect, "is the swift tongue." He moved it slowly through the air. It made a quiet whistling sound. "It is a weapon for champions. For duels of honor. The tip is made to find the weak spots in armor. A single quick strike, in and then out. It is an art." Min nodded slowly, her eyes wide. "It looks very precise." "Precision is life," Kale said. He placed the swift tongue back on its stand as if it were made of glass. He then moved to a much larger blade. This one was heavy and wide with a sharp curve at the end. He had to use 2 hands to lift it. "And this," he grunted, "is the bone cleaver." He held it up. It looked like it could cut a tree in half. "It does not need precision. It needs power. It is for the great beasts of our homeworld. It is for ending a fight with one blow. It can break a shield. It can break a body." Jin looked at the huge blade. Her mind was racing. The shape was so familiar. It was the same shape her grandmother used for cutting through large pieces of meat. The same curve. The same heavy back. She pressed her lips together and stayed silent. Kale put the bone cleaver down with a heavy thud. He then picked up a smaller tool. This one had a blade that was not smooth. It had teeth like a saw. "And this," he said, almost with a fondness in his voice, "is the flesh shredder. For when the enemy is too close for a long blade, you drag it across the skin, across the scales. It does not cut cleanly, it tears. It is a brutal, honest tool." Jin stared at the serrated blade. It was a common sight in every human kitchen. It was perfect for cutting through bread without crushing it. She could not believe what she was hearing. Kale continued his tour. He showed them more blades. A short, wide one he called the heart scoop. A pair of 2 thin, identical blades he called the twins of swift pain. With each new blade, Jin's confusion grew. The heart scoop was a clam knife. The twins were a simple paring knife set. He was not showing them a collection of weapons. He was showing them a full, high-quality set of kitchen knives. Kale finished his presentation. He stood in the middle of his collection, surrounded by his proud history. He looked at the two humans. He seemed to be waiting for something. For their amazement. For their fear, Min forced a smile. It is a very large collection. Kale's yellow eyes fixed on Jin. She had been too quiet. You, he rumbled. The quiet one. You study cultures. What do you think of the soul of my people? Does your soft race have anything that can compare to this? The room went very quiet. Min looked at Jin, her eyes begging her to say something polite. Something diplomatic. Jin looked at the swift tongue. She looked at the bone cleaver. She looked at the flesh shredder. The feeling in her chest was too strong now. It was the truth. She was a scientist. Her job was to report what she saw. She took a small step forward. Her heart was beating fast, but her voice was calm. These are remarkable artifacts, honored Kale, she began. Their craftsmanship is exceptional. Kale stood a little taller. He was hearing what he expected to hear. Jin continued. However, my people are very familiar with these forms. She pointed to the swift tongue. We call this one a slicing knife. It is used for cutting very thin pieces of fish. She pointed to the bone cleaver. That one is just called a cleaver. It is for cutting through bone and thick pieces of meat. Finally, she pointed to the flesh shredder. And that one is a bread knife. Its teeth are for slicing soft bread without squashing it. She looked Kale directly in his solid yellow eyes. She said the words clearly and slowly. Sir, these aren't weapons. These are kitchen knives. What the word kitchen hung in the air. It was a simple, common word. A human word, but in that room, surrounded by the gleaming blades, it was the most shocking thing that had ever been said. For a long moment, nothing happened. The only sound was the low, constant hum of the ship's engines. Kale did not move. He did not breathe. He stood like a statue made of dark stone, his three-fingered hand still resting on the stand that held the flesh shredder. His yellow eyes were locked on Jin. They were wide, unblinking. He was processing the word, trying to fit it into his understanding of the universe. It did not fit. Min made a small, choked sound next to Jin. It was a mix of a gasp and a groan. She took a half-step forward as if she could somehow pull the words back out of the air. Jin, she whispered, her voice tight with panic. What are you doing? Jin did not look at her. She kept her eyes on Kale. She had said what she believed was true. Now she had to face the result. Her heart was a loud drum in her ears, but her face remained calm. She was a scientist observing a reaction. Then the reaction began. A low sound started deep in Kyle's chest. It was not a word. It was a vibration, a growl so primal it seemed to make the cold air itself shake. The scales along his neck and shoulders, which usually lay flat, began to rise. They lifted away from his skin, fanning out like a collar of black knives. It was a threat display, a sign of pure animal rage. Kitchen, he finally said. The word was a snarl torn from his throat. He said it like it was a curse. Tools? He looked down at the flesh shredder in his hand. The tool he had said was for tearing an enemy apart at close range. The tool he had called brutal and honest. He looked from the blade to Jin. The confusion in his eyes was being burned away by a hot, bright anger. You compare the soul blade of Korvan to cutting plants. His voice was rising, losing its formal rumble and becoming a sharp, dangerous shout. You say the bone cleaver of my bloodline is for dead animal flesh? He took a step forward. He was huge, towering over Jin. The shadow he cast swallowed her. Min flinched and moved back, but Jin held her ground. She tilted her head up to keep looking at him. I did not compare them, Jin said, her voice still quiet but firm. I identified them. Their form has a function. That function is food preparation. Lies, Kale roared. The sound echoed off the metal walls. He threw the flesh shredder back onto its stand with a loud clatter. It was the first disrespectful thing he had done to any of his blades. He was too angry to care. You are a soft, foolish creature from a soft, foolish world. You have no honor, so you cannot see it. You look upon our history and you see only cooking. He swept a massive arm around the room, gesturing at his entire collection. These blades have tasted blood. They have won wars. They have stories that are sung in our great halls. And you call them kitchen knives. He said the last two words with so much disgust it was like he was spitting out poison. Jin knew she should be afraid. Logically, she understood that this massive, enraged warrior could easily break her in half. But a strange calm settled over her. His anger was not a rational argument. It was an emotional one, and she dealt in facts. "The shape of the blade you call swift tongue," she said, pointing to the long, thin knife, "is perfect for slicing without tearing. It is for delicate work. If you used it in a fight, the thin tip would snap off the moment it hit bone. It is a design for precision, but not for combat against armored opponents. It is for food." Kyle was shaking with rage. He seemed to be struggling to find words. He just kept growling, a deep, continuous sound that filled the room. "Please, Honored Kale," Min said, her voice shaking. She stepped slightly in front of Jin, trying to be a shield. "She did not mean to insult you. Our cultures are just very different. It was a mistake in translation." "There was no mistake," Kale thundered. The words were clear. "The insult was clear." The door to the chamber hissed open. The argument had been loud enough to be heard outside. Another Vikalar stood there. He was older than Kale. His scales were a lighter gray, and he had a long, pale scar across one side of his face. He stood calmly, taking in the scene. He saw Kale puffed up and furious. He saw the two humans, one terrified and one defiant. He saw the flesh shredder lying carelessly on its stand. "This is a place of quiet respect," the older Vikalar said. His voice was deep, but it was calm. It was the voice of command. This was Captain Vor. Kale immediately straightened up, his scales lowering slightly, but the anger was still burning in his eyes. "Captain," he said, the word sharp. This human. She has dishonored the Hall of Blades. She has dishonored our ancestors." Captain Vor's pale eyes moved to Jin. "Is this true, emissary?" Jin took a slow breath. "I spoke the truth as I see it, Captain. I identified the artifacts based on their form and function. In human culture, these are tools for preparing food. I meant no dishonor. I was answering a question." She called the swift tongue a tool for cutting fish. Kyle spat out. "She called the bone cleaver a tool for meat. She has reduced our greatest treasures to kitchen tools." Captain Vor was silent for a moment. He looked at the bone cleaver. He looked at the swift tongue. His face was hard to read. He looked back at Jin. "This is a very serious claim," Captain Vor said slowly. "You understand what you are saying? You are not just insulting Kale. You are saying that the sacred relics of our warrior caste, symbols of our strength and history, are nothing more than utensils." He did not sound angry. He sounded thoughtful, and that was somehow more dangerous. "Yes, Captain," Jin said.
"That is what I am saying."
"The evidence is in the design. The evidence is in our history." Kale shouted, unable to contain himself. "The stories, the songs. Stories can be misunderstood over time," Jin replied, still looking at Captain Vor. "A tool designed for survival can become a symbol of war if that is what a culture needs it to be." The room was tense again. Min looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Kale was glaring at Jin, his hands clenched into fists. Captain Vor was watching Jin, his head tilted slightly. Finally, Captain Vor spoke. "An interesting theory, emissary, but a theory is not proof. You have made a bold statement. To call our history a misunderstanding." He paused. "Can you prove it?" Jin looked from the captain's scarred face to the furious face of Kale, and then to the collection of gleaming, familiar blades on the wall. She nodded. "Yes," she said. "I believe I can." Captain Vor's question changed everything. The air was still thick with Kyle's anger, but now there was a new feeling. A challenge, proof. The word hung between them, a possible way forward or a path to a much deeper disaster. "Proof?" Kale's voice was a low growl. "How can she prove a lie? She will weave more stories with her soft, lying tongue." Captain Vor raised a hand, a simple gesture that instantly silenced the warrior. His pale eyes never left Jin. "You have accused us of a fundamental error about our own identity, emissary. You say we look at our past and see a warrior where there was a cook. If you are wrong, it is the gravest insult one species can give another. If you are right..." He paused, and for the first time, Jin saw a flicker of something uncertain in his steady gaze. "If you are right, it changes things. So I ask again, can you prove it?" Jin's mind was racing. She had to think like a scientist. This was not about winning an argument. It was about demonstrating a function. She needed a controlled experiment. "I can," she said, her voice gaining confidence. "But I will need some materials. And I will need to use one of these. She gestured to the wall of blades. Kale took a sharp step forward. You will not touch them. Your soft hands will stain their honor. She will have what she needs, Captain Vor said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He looked at Jin. What materials? The food you eat, Jin said. The raw ingredients. The protein pastes, the vegetable matter, whatever you consume before it is processed into your meals. A strange silence fell over the Vikalar. Kale looked confused. Min looked horrified. Our food? Min whispered to Jin. What are you doing? Captain Vor seemed equally puzzled. Our nutrient paste is synthesized. It is efficient. It provides all required sustenance. I am sure it does, Jin replied. But I'm not interested in the paste. I am interested in what the paste is made from. The raw, unprocessed blocks of protein. The whole root vegetables or fruits, if you have any. The basic ingredients. Understanding began to dawn on Captain Vor's face. He was a practical being. He saw the logic. You wish to use our sacred blades on the materials they were, according to you, designed for. Yes, Jin said. That is the proof. Their function will be revealed by their performance on the tasks I believe they were made for. Kyle was shaking his head, his scales ruffling again. This is a desecration. To use the bone cleaver on a piece of food. It is meant for the great horned lizard of Viklar. It is meant for breaking enemy armor. Then it should have no trouble with a tough vegetable, Jin said calmly. If it is a weapon, it will perform poorly at a delicate task. If it is a tool, it will excel. Let the blades themselves show us the truth. Captain Vor considered this. He looked at Kale's furious, betrayed face. He looked at the determined human woman. He made a decision. Very well, he said. We will go to the preparation room. You will have your materials. Kale, you will select 3 of your blades. The swift tongue, the bone cleaver, and the flesh shredder. You will carry them. You will watch. We will all watch. This was a punishment for Kale and a test for Jin. Kale would have to personally hand over his treasures for what he saw as a disgusting and dishonorable purpose, and Jin would have to perform under the weight of his hatred. Kale looked like he had been struck. He stood rigid for a moment, then gave a sharp, jerky nod. As you command, Captain. He moved to the wall. His movements were stiff as he took down the 3 blades. He handled them with extreme care, his anger mixed with a deep, personal pain. He would not look at Jin or Min. They left the Hall of Blades and walked through the cold gray corridors of the ship. The journey was silent and tense. Other Vikalar crew members stopped and stared as the group passed. They saw their proud warrior carrying 3 sacred blades, followed by the 2 small humans and their captain. It was a strange procession. They arrived at the ship's galley. It was not a kitchen as a human would know it. It was a sterile, functional room. There were no smells of cooking food. There were only large metal dispensers on the walls for the nutrient paste, and a few counters and sinks for cleaning equipment. It was clean, efficient, and utterly lifeless. On one of the counters, a crew member had placed a few items. There was a dense, dark brown block of processed protein. There was a pale, lumpy root vegetable that looked like a tough potato. There was a long, fibrous green fruit with a thick, leathery skin. These are the base materials before they are ground and synthesized, Captain Vor explained. We rarely see them in this form. They are perfect, Jin said. She turned to Min. I'll need your help. Min still looked nervous, but she nodded. She was an engineer. She understood machines and tools. Maybe she could understand this too. Jin turned to Kyle. He was holding the 3 blades as if they were his own children. His jaw was clenched tight. The swift tongue, please, Jin said, her voice soft but formal. Kyle hesitated. Captain Vor gave a slight nod. Slowly, with great reluctance, Kyle held out the long, thin blade. Jean took it. Her human hand looked small and fragile wrapped around the handle made for his large 3-fingered grip. She tested the weight. It was perfectly balanced.
For slicing.
She placed the dark protein block on the counter. She ignored the stares of the Vikalar who had gathered at the doorway to watch the strange event. She focused on the task. She held the swift tongue at a slight angle and began to draw the blade across the edge of the protein block. The blade moved through the dense material with a smooth, clean, whispering sound. It required very little pressure. A thin, almost transparent slice of protein peeled away from the block. It was perfect. She laid the slice on the counter. Then she made another, and another. Each slice was identical in thickness, delicate and precise. She looked at Captain Vor. A weapon's tip is its weakest point. You would not use a tip this fine to stab armor. You would use it for this, for creating many thin, even pieces from a single block. She then held out the swift tongue to Kale. The bone cleaver, please. Kale was staring at the neat pile of thin protein slices. He looked confused. He took the swift tongue back as if it were now contaminated, and handed her the heavy, curved cleaver. The handle was thick and solid in her hand. She positioned the tough root vegetable on the counter. She lifted the heavy blade and brought it down in a swift, controlled chop. There was a solid thunk. The vegetable split cleanly in two. She then chopped the halves into smaller, even chunks. The blade was heavy enough to transfer its energy perfectly, breaking through the tough skin and dense interior without getting stuck. A weapon for breaking bones would be thicker, with a different edge, she explained, setting the cleaver down. This is weighted for control and power on a cutting surface, for dividing large things into smaller, usable parts. Finally, she held her hand out for the last blade. The flesh shredder. Kale handed her the serrated knife. His anger seemed to have been replaced by a dawning, uncomfortable curiosity. Jin picked up the long green fruit with the tough skin. She picked up the serrated knife. She did not try to chop it. Instead, she used the pointed tip to pierce the leathery skin, and then used a gentle sawing motion, letting the teeth of the blade do the work. The skin gave way with a soft tearing sound, revealing a soft, pale green interior. She sawed off a slice. The soft inside was not crushed or smashed. The serrated edge had glided through the tough exterior while neatly cutting the tender inside. A smooth blade would have slipped on that skin, or crushed the soft part, she said, placing the slice next to the protein. This blade is designed for items with a hard outside and a soft inside. It grips and cuts without crushing. She looked at the 3 blades, then at the food she had prepared. There was a pile of thin protein slices, a bowl of chopped vegetable chunks, and slices of the green fruit. It was a simple raw meal, but it was a meal. It had variety. It had texture. She looked at Captain Vor and then at Kale. The proof is not in my words, she said quietly. It is in the design of the blades and the result of their use. These are not weapons that happen to cut food. They are tools perfectly designed for preparing it. The galley was utterly silent. The only sound was the low hum of the ship. The Vikalar crew members at the door did not move. They stared at the counter. They stared at the food. They had never seen anything like it. On the sterile metal counter, there was no longer just a brown protein block and a lumpy vegetable. Now there was a neat stack of thin, dark slices. There was a small pile of clean, pale chunks. There were slices of green fruit, the soft inside contrasting with the tough skin. It was a display. It was art. It was a quiet, powerful argument made not with words but with results. Captain Vor was the first to break the silence. He took a slow step forward, his eyes fixed on the arranged food. He did not look at Jin or at Kale. He looked only at what she had made with the sacred blades. He reached out a single, scaly finger. He gently touched one of the thin slices of protein. He pressed it. It was firm, yet it bent slightly. It was nothing like the uniform soft paste he ate every day. This, he began, but his voice trailed off. He seemed to have no words for it. Kale stood frozen, the 3 blades held loosely in his hands. He was not looking at the food with curiosity. He was looking at it with a kind of horror. The proof was right there in front of him. The swift tongue had not broken. It had performed its task with an elegance he had never imagined. The bone cleaver had not been dishonored by the vegetable. It had mastered it perfectly. The evidence was undeniable, and it was destroying his world. The texture is different, Captain Vor said, more to himself than to anyone else. He picked up one of the slices of protein. He looked at it, then at Jin. You eat your food like this? Often, Jin said. The texture is part of the experience. It makes the meal more satisfying. Captain Vor slowly brought the slice to his mouth and ate it. He chewed thoughtfully. The Viklar crew watched, their own faces a mix of shock and fascination. Eating raw, unprocessed base material was not something they did. It was strange. It was primitive. But their captain was doing it, he swallowed. He was silent for a long moment, processing the feel of the food, the way it required chewing, the way the flavor seemed stronger. He then picked up a chunk of the pale vegetable. He ate that too. He followed it with a slice of the green fruit. He ate in silence, his face unreadable. Finally, he turned to Kale. The warrior looked lost. The anger was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, painful confusion. "Kyle," Captain Vor said, his voice low. "Taste it." Kale flinched. "Captain, I cannot. It is not right." "Taste it," the captain repeated, his tone leaving no room for refusal. "You accused this human of lying. You said her words were an insult. Now you must face her evidence. You must see for yourself what your blades can truly do." Kyle's hands were trembling. He carefully placed the 3 blades down on the counter, away from the food as if they were too pure to be near it. He looked at the slices of protein. He looked at the tools of his ancestors. His pride was a heavy weight on his shoulders. Slowly, with a hand that seemed to resist his own command, he reached out and picked up a slice of the protein. He stared at it on his palm. It looked so small and insignificant against his dark scales. He put it in his mouth. He chewed. His expression changed. It was a small change, a slight widening of his yellow eyes. He was experiencing the same thing as the captain. The resistance of the food, the way it broke apart under his teeth, the release of its flavor in a way that was completely different from the bland, consistent paste. It was more work to eat, but it was also more. He did not say anything. He just stood there chewing, his gaze distant. He was remembering all the stories. The great duels fought with the swift tongue. The epic hunts with the bone cleaver. He had always imagined the swift tongue moving with lightning speed, piercing the heart of a mighty foe. Now he saw it moving with that same speed and precision. But it was slicing a root vegetable into perfect pieces to be shared around a fire. He had imagined the bone cleaver shattering the skull of a great beast. Now he saw it breaking down that same beast into portions to feed a family. The stories did not have to be wrong, but their meaning was shifting. The heroism was not just in the killing. It was in the providing. It was in the survival. He looked at the flesh shredder, the blade he had said was for tearing an enemy apart. He saw it now for what it was, a clever tool for dealing with a tricky type of food, for getting to the good part inside without making a mess. The truth was a cold, hard thing. It was not kind. It did not care about his pride. He looked at Jin. The human woman was just watching him, waiting. She was not smiling in victory. She was not looking smug. She was just observing as a scientist would. "The stories," Kyle said, his voice a rough whisper. It was the first time he had spoken since they entered the galley. "The songs in the great halls? They speak of great battles, of glory. Survival is a battle," Jin said softly. "Feeding your people is a kind of glory. Perhaps your ancestors were not just warriors. Perhaps they were survivors first. They used what they had to live. That is not a shameful thing. It is a brave thing." Captain Vor nodded slowly. He looked around at his crew, who were still watching, their rigid postures beginning to relax. He looked at the food on the counter, a simple meal that had caused a crisis. "The human is not our enemy," Captain Vor announced, his voice carrying through the quiet room. "She has not shamed us. She has reminded us of something we forgot." He picked up the bone cleaver, hefting its familiar weight. "We look at this and see a weapon. We sing songs of the blood it has spilled, but we never sang songs of the families it fed. We never sang of the children who grew strong because of the meat it prepared." He placed the cleaver back down with a new kind of respect. "We thought our strength was only in conquest. But there is another kind of strength. The strength to adapt. The strength to use a tool for life, not just for death. That is what she has shown us." Kyle was still staring at the counter, at the proof of his own history. The shock was still there, but the pain in his eyes was slowly being replaced by something else. It was a dawning, weary understanding. He had not lost his honor today. He had found a deeper, more humble truth about where it came from. The silence in the galley was different now. It was not the tense, angry silence from before. It was a quiet, thoughtful one. The Viklar crew members at the door began to slowly drift away, their whispers filled with the new, strange idea. They were not talking about the human's insult. They were talking about the food. They were talking about the blades. Captain Vor stood with his arms crossed, looking at the simple meal on the counter. He seemed older now, as if he had just learned a heavy lesson about his own people. He turned to Jin and Min. "You have given us much to think about," he said. His voice was not friendly, but it was respectful. "Our discussions will continue. For now, you may return to your quarters. It was a dismissal. Min quickly nodded, looking relieved that it was over. She gently touched Jin's arm, urging her to leave. But Jin did not move right away. Her eyes were on Kale. The massive warrior was still standing by the counter, looking down at the 3 blades. He had not moved since he tasted the food. His broad shoulders were slumped. He looked like a mountain that had been worn down by a slow, patient river. All his pride, all his certainty was gone. He looked lost. Jin felt a strange feeling. It was not pity. It was understanding. She had not wanted to break him. She had only wanted to show the truth. But seeing him like this, she knew that the truth could be a heavy thing to carry. She picked up the swift tongue from the counter. Its long, thin blade still gleamed. She then picked up one of the slices of the green fruit she had cut. She held them both carefully. She walked over to Kale. Min watched her, holding her breath. Captain Vor watched, his expression unreadable. Jin stopped in front of the warrior. He was so much taller than her. He finally lifted his head. His yellow eyes were filled with a deep confusion. He looked at the blade in her hand, then at her face. "Honored Kale," Jin said, her voice soft but clear in the quiet room. "You asked if my people had anything that could compare to your collection. I told you we had the same tools, but I did not tell you why they are important to us." She held up the slice of green fruit on the flat of the blade, offering it to him. It was a gesture not of challenge, but of sharing. It was the way one might offer a taste to a friend in a kitchen. "A weapon's purpose is to divide," she said, "to separate an enemy from you, to create distance." She gestured with the blade holding the fruit. "A tool's purpose is to bring together, to prepare a meal that is shared, to turn one thing into something that can feed many. It does not create distance. It creates community." Kyle looked at the fruit on the blade. He looked at the gentle way she held it. This was not a desecration. This was a different kind of use, a different kind of honor. Slowly, very slowly, he reached out. His large, scaly fingers were careful as he took the slice of fruit from the tip of the swift tongue. He did not eat it right away. He just held it. "The songs," he said, his voice rough. "We always sang of the lone warrior, the champion with his blade." "Perhaps you forgot the other verses," Jin said. "Perhaps the songs were about the warrior who provided for his tribe, the one who used his skill to ensure no one went hungry. That is also a hero." Captain Vor made a low sound of agreement. "A fleet that cannot feed itself is a weak fleet," he said. "A people who cannot provide for their young will not survive." We were so focused on being warriors, we forgot we also need to be fathers, mothers, providers. Cal listened. He looked at the fruit in his hand. He finally put it in his mouth and ate it. He chewed slowly, thinking. He then looked at the bone cleaver. He picked it up. He felt its familiar weight, but the feeling was different now. He imagined not swinging it at an enemy, but using it to break down the carcass of a great animal under an alien sun, his clan waiting to be fed. He imagined the respect for the creature that gave its life. It was not a less honorable picture. It was, in its own way, more noble. He looked at Jin. The confusion in his eyes was clearing, replaced by a new, solid understanding. "You did not shame my blades," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement he was making to himself. "You showed me their first purpose. The most important purpose," Jin nodded. "To give life, not just to take it." Kale placed the bone cleaver back on the counter with a new kind of care. It was not the fragile care of something sacred and distant. It was the respectful care of a useful, important tool. He turned to Captain Vor. "Captain, I would like permission to learn." "Learn what, warrior?" the captain asked. "About this," Kale said, gesturing to the food. "About the use of these tools for their first purpose. If our ancestors knew this, then we should know it too. It is part of our history, a part we have forgotten." Captain Vor looked from Kale's determined face to Jin's calm one. A slow nod was his answer. A wise decision. "Our talks with the humans will now include this. Cultural exchange." He looked at Jin. "Your people have a different strength, emissary. It is not in your claws or your armor. It is in your way of seeing. You look at a weapon and see a kitchen knife. You look at an enemy and see a potential friend. It is a strange strength, but it is a strong one." Jin finally allowed herself a small, quiet smile. "We try to understand," she said. Min stepped forward, her fear gone, replaced by her natural curiosity. "We could show you some basic techniques," she said to Kale. "How to hold the blades for different tasks. It's really just simple engineering. Kale gave a slow, serious nod. It was the same nod he would give when accepting a new fighting style. I would like that. The group began to walk out of the galley, leaving the cleaned counter behind. The crisis was over. The truth had been told, and it had not broken them. It had, in a strange way, given them something new. As they walked back through the gray corridors, Jin walked beside Kale. He was quiet, but the storm inside him had passed. He was not a warrior whose pride had been shattered. He was a student who had just been given a much bigger lesson to learn. Humanity's strength was not about being the best fighters. It was about seeing the world differently. It was about looking at a collection of deadly weapons and seeing the simple, humble truth. They were just kitchen knives. And in that truth, they had found a way to build a bridge, not start a war.